Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. Glad to have you guys here on this Saturday the 18th of July, 2020. What would World War III be like? What would a war between the nations in World War III actually look like? Well, the first thing we'd picture in our mind would be mushrooms sprouting everywhere. And not literal mushrooms, a cloud that's in that shape. And this is what we picture. But what if it didn't happen like that at all? Think about things for a minute. That particular technology was started in around 1940. Oh, they were on the first workings of it in around 1944, 1945. The Germans were working on it. There was heavy water plants in Germany where they were trying to make heavy water in order to create the first atomic weapons. Germany had a rocket. It was called the V-2 rocket, and they were going to use it as a delivery system. They had underground systems, that giant bases underneath the ground where they were working on building these V-2 rockets as a delivery system for the new weapon that they were creating. And the new weapon that they were creating was an atomic bomb. That Germany was working on it extensively. The United States was in a race to develop the atomic bomb. The first atomic bomb the United States was starting to develop was something they called Gadget. And Gadget basically was a giant spherical device with explosive devices all the way around the outer circle of the device that would explode inwards, creating a tremendous pressure on a radioactive material that would cause a critical mass to form and would split the atom at the center of that pressure and create the first atomic weapon that America would have. They're in a race. America used its first atomic weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. From that time till now, even though this is over 70-year-old technology, everybody pictures World War III as being a war that would use these weapons. But there's other weapon systems out there now that have been devised. The thoughts that went through my head that's entirely plausible that World War III might not involve the thermonuclear weapons, that everybody thinks that's what would happen. There's biologicals out there. Almost every large major power on Earth today, and even some of the smaller ones, like take North Korea, for instance, they have biological weapons and biological weapon programs where they can actually take viruses and they can take bacteria and different kinds of things that they find in the earth, native to the earth, and they can enhance these, change their structure somewhat, and form them into a weapon system. The primary use of these biological weapons is to use on the battlefield, but these weapons do exist in the larger countries like the United States of America, China, Russia. They all have extensive programs into research into these biological weapons. Now, with any biological weapon system, you need to have what's called a vector. And basically what the vector is a carrier to carry the biological weapon system to the host. Now, oftentimes through history, in the natural world, we have these vectors. And the vectors are things like mosquitoes. All the way through history have been a vector of different kinds of either bacteria or viruses. Quite recently, we had a virus we had West Nile virus. It was being carried by mosquitoes. Malaria is one of the more famous viruses that's carried by mosquitoes, and you also have yellow fever, and you have dengue, and you have there's a whole host. Ticks act as a vector to carry viruses, and also to carry different other kinds of parasitic life forms, like the disease we know as Lyme's disease is one of the most famous that ticks carry, and that's not a virus. Lyme's disease is I think what they call a spirochete. It's a tiny little microscopic parasite that's very closely related to a venereal disease called syphilis. Is very closely related to, and they're both transmitted very similar way, and everything. They're very closely related diseases. But it's biological research. During biological research, what they actually do is they always, and this is what I've heard years ago, is they'll always create a cure, either a cure or an antidote or a vaccine for the biological weapon that they manufacture before they release it. Now that's what I heard years ago in my research, and I still believe it holds true today. And it makes a lot of sense, So we have these countries that have these biological weapons. Now there's other weapon systems being developed now in the 21st century. We have things like the High Altitude Research Program the United States has, and better known as HARP. And different programs like this can actually affect the weather. You could quite literally make it rain for weeks or months or years over a particular area of the earth using this type of technology. The clouds can be superheated with this Tesla-type technology that basically, and then when the clouds rise, when they're superheated, of course, they're going to come into the upper atmosphere where the air is much colder. If you guys have ever been on a jet plane, you'll know that when you leave the ground, the temperature might be 70 degrees Fahrenheit or maybe 22 degrees Celsius. Then as you climb, when the plane gets up around 10,000 feet, it starts to get cooler. When the plane gets up around 30,000 feet, well, let's just put it this way. You feel the windows and they're cold. They're like 30 degrees below zero outside the plane when you're up at, maybe even 40 degrees below zero when you're up at 30,000 feet. Now, when clouds rise, what they do is they do something that's called condense. As the cloud reaches up into the sky and it touches the colder atmosphere up above, the water molecules condense into droplets and fall as rain. By increasing the heat temperature of the clouds, the cloud layer, and this is what HARP can do, the clouds will rise up rather than stay down at a lower level, and they'll rise up high enough where they'll condense and fall down as rain. And so what you can actually do is you can actually make it rain over one area until your enemy is basically flooded to death. It would be particularly, a weapon like that would be particularly effective in an area where there's a rather large system of dams. Because then what would happen is these dams would start to overflow, and the enemy would then have a desperate situation, and all footprints or all tracks leading back to the person that's using this type of weapon system would not be there, because nobody expects the weather to be under control. There's not only HARP, there's other programs out there that that like Skylar type technology. I don't know if I'm Skylar. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it exactly correctly, but basically it amounts to using the Earth itself as a weapon system. Using nuclear technology, the Earth has what's called fault lines, and these fault lines are where different continents build up pressure against another continent. The continents are slowly moving. And as this pressure builds up, it releases naturally in nature as what we call an earthquake. Using this nuclear technology, they can force this slippage between these tectonic plates, and they can create earthquakes and tidal waves with no fingerprints attached. Nobody knows that that's what they've actually done. People would always blame these things right down from these technologies on Mother Nature. They'd say, well, Mother Nature did it to us. And so there it would be an effective hidden weapon to use against the enemy, where the enemy wouldn't even be able to blame you, except somehow they'd probably figure out that you did it, but they just don't know how you did it. In other words, it would give you the power like God to inflict natural disasters on your enemy. So we're dealing with that. So what would World War III look like? Would we even know that World War III was actually being waged with these kind of sophisticated weapon systems? You know? Would we even see it? Or would only the intelligence communities of each country? Now, each particular country has intelligence agencies. And Russia has an intelligence agency. China has an intelligence agency. In fact, almost every country has an intelligence agency. And these intelligence agencies, are not in the dark like we are. They write reports and they have different kinds of briefings and things like that they can give the people in the political structure. I'm sure if a war was being waged secretly, that people within the intelligence structure would give briefings to the highest political parts of the political structure. Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. I'm surmising that they probably would. So we're living in a new age where a extensive war could be actually going on, and the people, the civilians of the world, wouldn't even know that a war was actually happening. But they would be affected by these things. Now, I never touched upon economic warfare. At the same time, secret economic warfare could be going on behind the scenes. And different countries could be making moves and counter moves in the economic theater to try to bring down the other country. So what effectively, ultimately, would be the goal of this kind of secret warfare? If there was a secret war being waged in the world someplace, what would be their goal? What would be their agenda? Well, most likely, what I would think would be their agenda is to try to bring down the enemy's regime. In other words, a regime change. Effectively, they would probably attack a country to a certain point secretly, where they'd make things so bad on those particular citizens through either sanctions, or possibly they would use sanctions, or they would use the weather. Like I say, they could use the weather, or they could use diseases, plagues on the people of that particular country. They would use these things effectively to try to bring down the government, to try to bring down the system, and then they would win. They would win when there was a regime change. The country that was attacking would win. Now, this might be more what World War III would look like, rather than what we're used to with the mushroom clouds and everything. Just some things I wanted to point out to you guys. Now, we all know that China and the United States right now are in a trade war. It's been announced. We all know that they're in a trade war between each other. And this trade war doesn't seem to be letting off anytime soon. It has affected global trade tremendously. At the same time, We're in a situation in the world right now we've never seen before. All of the people on Earth right now are feeling pressured. There's no country that is completely free of this. The United States right now, there's an awful lot of people that feel like they have no way out. They feel like they don't know what to do. They feel like, what am I going to do? I can't pay my mortgage. I got no job anymore and everything. And we're talking about millions of people here. The same thing is being felt by the Chinese citizens. One woman I saw the other day, she was so upset in China that she actually got an axe. Now, this is a woman, got an axe, and she went over and there was a big sign, in Chinese. And she started to cut the sign to pieces, swinging the axe, because she was so mad at the communist regime. It was a statement that she was making, and she started to cut their sign apart. And it showed, I showed the picture of the sign, it showed the big axe cuts in the wood, where she took big chunks out of the wood, People are really upset. I saw one bus driver in China. The Chinese demolished his house or whatever, and he drove the bus off the bridge right into the canal. And, things like that are happening in China because of the pressure. What's happening in the United States right now? We see that cities are burning. The whole world is feeling the pressure right now of what exactly, I'm not sure. But I can tell you things are not good and they're getting worse by the day. Listen, thank you guys for listening to my show. Like and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode. Bye-bye.